"You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad," the vampire king whispered. What happened next shocked everyone. Emily smoothed the ivory lace of her wedding dress as she stood in the cathedral's bridal antechamber, her fingers trembling against the delicate fabric. The late afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned shadows across the stone floor, ruby, sapphire, emerald, like blood and bruises dressed in beauty. Her reflection stared back from the gilded mirror, a stranger in white, her blue eyes too wide, her smile rehearsed and hollow. A single white lily petal drifted from her bouquet to the floor, the only movement in the suffocating stillness. Emily checked the antique clock on the wall. 5:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, she'd walk down that aisle. Julian would be waiting, his hand extended, his charming smile fixed in place like a mask that never slipped. "You're overthinking this," Emily whispered to herself, shaking her head. "Every bride gets cold feet." But this wasn't cold feet. This was something older, deeper. A warning her bones understood but her mind refused to hear. Just last week, Julian had appeared outside her apartment unannounced, insisting he couldn't bear to be away from her. It had seemed romantic at the time. Now, standing alone in this echoing stone chamber, it felt like surveillance. "Before we continue, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And if you're locked in already, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I have saved something extra special for you and I don't want you to miss it." Now back to the story. The engagement had happened fast. Too fast. She'd met Julian at a charity gala 3 months ago, a world she didn't belong to, full of old money and older secrets. He'd pursued her with expensive gifts and whispered promises, filling the empty space where a family should have been. No parents to ask questions. No siblings to raise red flags. Just Emily, alone, desperate to finally belong somewhere. The organ music swelled from beyond the carved wooden doors, a deep, resonant call. Emily's fingers tightened around her bouquet, remembering Julian's strange request that she wear his grandmother's necklace, the heavy antique choker now pressing cold against her throat like a collar. The scent of lilies grew overwhelming, sweet and cloying, and beneath it, something else. Something metallic like old pennies left in the rain. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, louder now, more insistent as the doors began to open. The doors opened like the mouth of some ancient stone beast, and Emily stepped through into a sea of faces. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, reflecting candlelight like animal pupils in the dark. The organ music swelled, a sound that should have been triumphant but felt instead like a funeral march played in reverse. Her feet moved automatically down the white runner, each step taking her closer to the figure waiting at the altar. Julian stood perfectly still, perfectly composed, his dark suit tailored to aristocratic precision. He watched her approach with an expression that might have been love to anyone else. But Emily had learned to read the micro-movements others missed, the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his fingers flexed and tightened at his sides, the hunger that flickered behind his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She was prey walking herself to the hunter. The thought came unbidden, sharp and clear, and Emily stumbled slightly. A ripple of polite concern moved through the guests. Julian's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp in the candlelight. The priest, an old man with papery skin who'd appeared specifically for this wedding, someone Julian knew, someone Emily had never met before today, gestured for her to take her place. Emily's hands felt numb as Julian took them in his own. His grip was ice-cold despite the warmth of the cathedral, and that metallic scent grew stronger, cloying, making her stomach turn. The antique choker pressed harder against her throat with each breath. The priest began speaking in a voice like dried leaves. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Emily's vision blurred at the edges. The candlelight seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could feel Julian's thumb tracing circles on her wrist, right over her pulse point, as though he were counting each beat, measuring something. Should anyone present know of any reason that this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony? The priest intoned, the words clearly perfunctory. No one ever actually objected at weddings. This was just ceremony, just tradition, just... The heavy oak doors at the cathedral's entrance crashed open. The sound shattered the suffocating atmosphere like a stone through glass. Every head turned. The organ music faltered and died. Even Julian's grip loosened slightly as a figure stepped through the doorway, backlit by the dying sunset. He was tall, ethereal, moving down the aisle with a predator's fluid grace. Long platinum hair caught the candlelight, and his velvet coat, deep black with floral embroidery crawling across the shoulders like roses, whispered against the stone floor. His skin was porcelain pale, impossibly smooth, and his eyes were the color of ancient ice. Lucius Valerius walked through the frozen congregation as though they were merely set pieces. His gaze locked on Emily with an intensity that should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest, recognition without understanding, like remembering a dream upon waking. He reached the altar in seconds that felt like hours. Julian's hand tightened on Emily's wrist, painful now, possessive. Who the hell? But Lucius ignored him entirely. He stepped directly between them, his presence fracturing Julian's composure for the first time since Emily had known him. Up close, Lucius was even more striking, beautiful in a way that didn't seem quite human, dangerous in a way that felt like salvation. He leaned in close, his breath cool against her ear, his lips barely moving. "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad." Emily's mind went blank. Her what? But Lucius was already pulling back, his expression transforming into something public, performative. His voice rang out across the cathedral, cultured and commanding. "Emily, darling. I know we've been estranged, but I will not, allow this to continue without speaking my piece." The words were absurd. Emily had no father, but his eyes held hers with desperate urgency beneath the performance, and every instinct she'd been suppressing screamed at her to trust him. Emily heard herself say, "I didn't think you'd come." Something flickered in Lucius's expression. Approval, perhaps. He extended his arm. We need to talk. Now." Julian moved to block them, his civilized mask cracking. "She's not going anywhere with her father." Lucius's smile was razor-sharp. "How inappropriate that would be. Unless you have something to hide." The congregation stirred, uncertain, scandalized. Julian's face contorted with barely controlled rage, his eyes flashing with something inhuman for just a fraction of a second. But there were too many witnesses, too many phones probably already recording. Emily took Lucius's arm. It felt solid, real, safer than anything had felt in months. They walked back down the aisle together, past the shocked guests, past the frozen groomsmen whose eyes followed them with unnatural stillness, past Julian who stood trembling at the altar like a starving man watching his meal walk away. The moment they crossed the threshold into the twilight air, Lucius's performative warmth vanished. "Run," he said simply, and the world exploded into motion. Emily's heels hit the stone steps outside the cathedral, and she nearly twisted her ankle before Lucius caught her arm. His grip iron-strong but somehow not painful. The wedding dress tangled around her legs as he pulled her forward, the white fabric already collecting dust and grime from the street. "Wait, I don't understand," Emily gasped, but Lucius was already propelling her toward a vehicle she hadn't noticed before. It sat at the curb like a sleeping panther, a sleek black car with tinted windows so dark they seemed to swallow light. The lines were elegant but aggressive, and something about the way it sat low and heavy suggested this was no ordinary luxury sedan. "No time," Lucius said, and without ceremony. He opened the rear door and physically lifted Emily, shoving her inside the car. She landed across the leather seat in a tangle of lace and tulle. "Hey!" Emily struggled upright, fury replacing confusion. "You can't just..." The cathedral doors burst open behind them. Emily twisted to look through the rear window, and her protest died in her throat. The groomsmen poured out onto the steps, 6 men who'd stood beside Julian at the altar, all wearing identical gray suits and practiced smiles. Except they weren't smiling anymore. Their faces had changed, transformed, become something that couldn't exist. Their eyes blazed crimson in the dimming light, catching the glow of the street lamps like reflective tape. Their mouths had opened wide, revealing rows of teeth that were sharp, long fangs. Actual fangs that caught the light as they snarled. "That's not possible," Emily whispered. "That's not." Lucius slid into the driver's seat with inhuman speed, and the engine roared to life, a deep, powerful sound that vibrated through Emily's bones. "Seat belt," he commanded. The first groomsman reached the car just as Lucius threw it into gear. The thing, because Emily couldn't think of it as human anymore, slammed both hands onto the trunk with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. Emily heard metal crumple like tinfoil. He screamed. Lucius didn't flinch. The car shot forward with acceleration that pressed Emily back into the seat, still fumbling for the seatbelt with shaking hands. Through the rear window, she watched the groomsman straighten, his handprint embedded in the reinforced metal, and then he began to run. Not human running. Not even Olympic sprinter running. This was something else entirely, a blur of motion that covered impossible distances with each stride. His body moving with predatory fluidity that made Emily's hindbrain scream danger in languages older than words. "They're gaining." Emily's voice pitched high with panic as she finally clicked the seatbelt into place. The city street whipped past in a blur of light and shadow. Lucius took a corner at a speed that should have flipped them, but the car held the road like it was magnetized. Emily clutched the door handle, watching the speedometer climb past numbers that couldn't be legal. 2 more figures appeared ahead, standing in the center of the road as if daring the car to reach them. "Lucius!" Emily braced for impact. He didn't slow down. If anything, he accelerated. At the last moment, the figures leapt, not aside but upward, springing toward the windshield with alarming agility. Emily glimpsed their glowing eyes and open mouths before Lucius wrenched the wheel. The car spun, controlled yet violent, sending one creature sliding across the hood and out of sight. The second collided with the windshield, the whole pane vibrating from the impact. Emily froze as its distorted silhouette pressed against the glass, its movements frantic and unnatural. Then Lucius slammed the brakes and accelerated again in one violent motion, and the creature tumbled away into the darkness. "What are they?" Emily's voice barely worked. Her entire body was shaking. "What the hell are they?" "The same thing Julian is," Lucius said, his voice preternaturally calm as he navigated another impossible turn. "Vampires." The word hung in the air like a curse. Emily started to laugh, hysterical because that was insane, that was impossible, that was... The rear window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the back seat and Emily's scream cut off as a hand, pale, long-fingered, impossibly strong, reached through and grabbed her shoulder. Claws punctured the fabric of her dress. The thing was hanging onto the car from the outside, pulling itself through the window, its face a nightmare with crimson eyes. Emily grabbed its wrist, trying to pry it off, but it was like fighting stone. Lucius glanced back, his ice-pale eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Then, he yanked the emergency brake while simultaneously spinning the wheel. The car went into a full spin. Physics took over. The vampire lost its grip and was flung from the vehicle like a rag doll, its body hitting a parked car with enough force to set off the alarm and crumple the door inward. Lucius straightened the wheel, released the brake, and they shot forward again as if nothing had happened. Emily sat trembling, surrounded by shattered glass, her shoulder throbbing where the grip had been, watching through the broken window as the creatures finally fell behind, unable to match the sustained speed. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her mind wouldn't accept what her eyes had seen. "Vampires," she whispered to the empty air. "Vampires are real." And if that was true, then everything else she thought she knew about the world was a lie. The car finally slowed after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Emily sat rigid in the back seat, her wedding dress torn and blood-stained, glass fragments catching the moonlight like diamonds scattered across white lace. The shoulder wound had stopped bleeding but throbbed with each heartbeat, a reminder that the impossible had teeth and claws. They turned off the main road onto a private drive that wound through dense forest. Ancient trees created a tunnel of darkness overhead, their branches interlacing like arthritic fingers. The headlights carved a path through shadow until the forest suddenly opened, revealing a manor that looked like it had been transplanted from another century. It rose from the manicured grounds like a monument to old power. 3 stories of grey stone and Gothic architecture, with tall windows that reflected nothing and towers that pierced the night sky. Gargoyles crouched along the roofline, their stone faces frozen in eternal warning. The whole structure radiated age and secrets. Lucius pulled the car into a circular drive and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening after the roar of their escape. Emily didn't move. Couldn't move. Her hands were still clenched in her lap, knuckles white. "We're safe here," Lucius said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since declaring vampires real. "Safe?" Emily's laugh was brittle, broken. "Safe from what?" "Monsters. The man I was about to marry who apparently wants to kill me. Or you, whoever the hell you actually are." Lucius turned in his seat to face her fully. In the dim light from the dashboard, his features were sharp angles and shadow, beautiful and alien. "You have questions. You deserve answers. Come inside." "Why should I trust you?" The words came out sharper than Emily intended, fueled by fear and adrenaline and the terrible understanding that her entire reality had shattered. "You lied. The whole father thing was a lie." "It was," Lucius admitted, no defensiveness in his tone. "It was the only way to extract you from that cathedral without starting a bloodbath in front of witnesses. Julian's followers would have torn through those guests to stop us." Emily thought of those red eyes, those fangs, the inhuman strength. She believed him, and that belief made everything worse. She climbed out of the car on shaking legs, the cool night air hitting her bare shoulders and making her shiver. Lucius was beside her in an instant, moving with that unnatural speed, draping his velvet coat around her shoulders. It smelled like sandalwood and something older, like ancient libraries and winter nights. Inside, the manor was exactly what Emily expected and somehow more. The entrance hall soared 2 stories high, with a grand staircase splitting in opposite directions. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls, portraits of pale, beautiful people whose eyes seemed to follow movement. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of crystal, currently unlit, leaving the space in atmospheric gloom. Lucius led her to a study where a fire already burned in the hearth. Impossible, since no one had been here, unless someone else lived in this Gothic fortress. The room was lined floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines cracked with age. He gestured to a wingback chair near the fire. Emily remained standing. "Talk." Lucius moved to a sideboard and poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. He offered one to Emily, who ignored it. He set both glasses down untouched. "My name is Lucius Valerius," he began, his voice carrying the weight of formality, of confession. "I am not your father. I'm not related to you by blood. But I did know your ancestors. Knew them well, in fact. I made a vow to protect their bloodline." He paused, his ice-colored eyes meeting hers. "I am what humans have called many things over the centuries. Ancient. Progenitor. In the hierarchy of my kind, I am king." Emily's mind reeled. "You're saying you're the vampire king? Like the vampire king?" "There are many vampires," Lucius continued. "But yes, I am their sovereign, or I was before the fractures. Before rogues like Julian decided power mattered more than the old laws." "And what does that have to do with me?" Emily heard herself ask, even though part of her didn't want to know, wanted to unknow everything from the last hour. "You are the last of the more vain bloodline," Lucius said, and the name meant nothing to Emily, just syllables. "Your ancestors were not entirely human. They were half human, half vampire. The offspring of a forbidden union centuries ago. That blood has diluted over generations. But in you..." He studied her with an intensity that made Emily want to step back. "In you, it runs stronger than it has in 200 years. That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm an orphan who grew up in foster care. I have no family, no history, no records, Lucius interrupted gently. Because your bloodline was hidden, protected, until someone found you anyway. Julian. The gala. The whirlwind romance that had felt too good to be true because it was too good to be true. He was going to kill me, Emily whispered. At my own wedding. Not kill. Sacrifice. There's a difference. Lucius's expression darkened. Your blood can break certain bindings. Ancient limitations placed on vampire kind. Julian leads the Sanguine Order, a faction that believes drinking your bloodline dry will grant them power to walk in sunlight, to be immune to our traditional weaknesses. Emily sank into the chair, her legs finally giving out. The wedding dress pooled around her like a shroud. This is insane. It's the truth. You should have told me. Before the father lie before. Would you have believed me? Lucius asked simply. If I'd walked up to you in that cathedral and said, I'm a vampire king, you're half vampire, your groom wants to sacrifice you, would you have come willingly? Emily wanted to argue, but he was right. She would have thought him insane. She would have called for help. She would have stayed with Julian. She would be dead. I have nowhere to go, Emily said, the reality settling over her like a weight. Everyone at that wedding thinks I'm crazy. Julian knows where I live. And apparently I'm some kind of, what did you call it, damper? The word felt strange on her tongue. You're safe here, Lucius said again. Julian cannot breach these wards. And you're not a prisoner. But if you want to survive what's coming, you need to learn what you are. What you can become. Emily looked up at him. This impossible being who'd crashed her nightmare wedding and shattered her world to save it. What am I becoming? Lucius's smile was slight, dangerous. Something they'll fear. Across the city, in the cathedral that still smelled of lilies and broken dreams, Julian stood perfectly still at the altar. The guests had been dismissed with carefully crafted explanations and compelled forgetfulness. Minor vampire talents that left humans confused but compliant. Now only his inner circle remained. 6 figures in grey suits who kept their distance, their earlier confidence replaced with palpable fear. The 7th groomsman knelt before Julian on the cold stone floor. His head bowed. His suit was torn from the car chase, and though his wounds had already healed, the fear remained fresh. Marcus. Julian's voice was soft, conversational, which somehow made it worse. You had one task. My lord, we didn't anticipate. Lucius Valerius. Julian spoke the name like a curse, beginning to pace with controlled, predatory movements. The dead king walks into my ceremony, takes what belongs to me, and you didn't anticipate it? We pursued them immediately, Marcus said, his voice cracking. We nearly had her. Julian moved faster than sight, his hand gripping Marcus's throat and lifting him off the ground. The subordinate's feet dangled, but he knew better than to fight back. Nearly, Julian hissed, his face inches from Marcus's, is the word of failures. He held Marcus suspended, letting every vampire in the room feel the weight of his displeasure, then released him. Marcus collapsed, gasping. 1 week to find where Lucius has taken her, Julian said, his composure returning like a mask. Fail me again, and I'll give you to the hunger. You'll spend eternity starving in the catacombs, too weak to die, too cursed to feed. Yes, my lord, Marcus rasped. All of you find the girl. I don't care if you have to burn down every safe house Lucius owns. The ritual requires her blood, and I will have it. The vampires fled, leaving Julian alone. He looked at his hand, the one that should have held Emily's during their vows, and slowly clenched it into a fist. 3 months of planning. 3 months of playing the charming suitor, all to position her exactly where he needed her. And Lucius had stolen it in a single moment. Julian's controlled expression cracked, and he drove his fist into the stone altar. The ancient rock splintered, cracks spider-webbing across its surface. She would be his, one way or another. Emily woke in an unfamiliar bed, disoriented until the previous night crashed back. The wedding, the escape, vampires. She sat up quickly, her shoulder protesting. Someone had bandaged it while she slept, the white gauze stark against her skin. She was wearing simple cotton pajamas that weren't hers. The thought of Lucius changing her should have alarmed her, but felt clinical, practical. He'd saved her life. That earned some trust. The bedroom overlooked the forest estate, morning light filtering through burgundy curtains. At least one vampire myth was false. Lucius had walked in daylight. Emily found her way to the library, following instinct and the scent of old books. Lucius was nowhere to be seen. On the desk near the window sat a leather folder, almost deliberately placed. The first photograph stole her breath. Sepia-toned, dated 1923. A woman stood beside a man Emily recognized immediately. Julian, looking exactly the same, down to that practiced smile. But the woman made Emily's blood run cold. She could have been Emily's twin. Same blonde hair, same features, same blue eyes staring at the camera with poorly hidden unease. She flipped pages. Another photograph, 1956. Julian again, ageless, with his arm around another blonde woman in a wedding dress. The resemblance was uncanny. More photographs spanning decades. 1978. 1989. 2001. 2015. Different eras, different fashions, but always the same man and always women who looked disturbingly similar. Like he'd been searching for the same face across a century. Beneath the photographs were yellowed newspaper clippings. Local heiress vanishes after honeymoon. Young bride missing, husband distraught. Society wedding ends in tragedy. Every woman had disappeared shortly after marrying Julian. Every single one looked like Emily. The final page showed a handwritten genealogy chart in elegant script, tracing a bloodline called Morvain through centuries. Most branches ended abruptly with dates and the word deceased. One thread wound carefully through time, through the women in the photographs, until it reached the bottom. There, in fresh ink, was Emily's name, the last of the line. Footsteps behind her. Emily spun to find Lucius in the doorway. His expression unreadable. "You left this for me to find," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You deserved to know what you escaped," Lucius replied. "And what Julian has been doing while the vampire world looked the other way." Emily looked back at the photographs, at the ghosts wearing her face. They all died. He killed them all. He consumed them in ritual sacrifice, trying to unlock the power in your bloodline. But the blood was too diluted. It didn't work. Lucius's voice was quiet, factual. "So he kept searching through your family tree until he found you." Emily gripped the desk for support. "I'm not just the last of my line. I'm his last chance." "Yes," Lucius said. "Which is why he'll never stop hunting you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Emily understood with terrible clarity that her old life, the quiet cafe job, the dream of normalcy, was gone forever. Emily spent the next 2 days in the manor like a ghost haunting her own life. Lucius gave her space, appearing only for brief conversations about vampire history and the political factions she couldn't quite follow. The isolation pressed against her like physical weight, making the vast library feel like a luxurious prison. On the third night, she found her purse in the room where she'd first slept. Someone had retrieved it from the cathedral. Her phone was inside, battery nearly dead. Emily's hands trembled as she plugged it in and watched it come to life. 47 missed calls. Hundreds of texts. Most from numbers she didn't recognize, but several from Jenny, her co-worker at the cafe. The messages started concerned and grew frantic. "And what happened? Everyone's saying you ran out on your wedding. Please just tell me you're okay. I'm worried. Call me." Emily's throat tightened. Jenny was the closest thing she had to a friend, the one who'd covered her shifts, who'd helped her pick out the wedding dress she'd never actually worn down the aisle. Normal, human Jenny who knew nothing about vampires or ancient bloodlines or ritual sacrifices. She started typing before she could second-guess herself. "I'm okay. I'm sorry I disappeared. Things with Julian weren't what they seemed. I'm somewhere safe. I'll explain everything soon, I promise. She hit send and immediately felt lighter, like she'd touched something real in a world that had become nightmarishly surreal. The reply came within seconds. Oh, thank God. Where are you? I'll come get you. Emily looked around the library, at the centuries-old books and Gothic architecture. How could she possibly explain where she was? I can't really say right now. It's complicated. But I'm fine, really. That's cryptic as hell. You're freaking me out. Emily smiled despite everything. That was so perfectly Jenny. Blunt, protective, loyal. No. Sorry. I just needed you to know I'm alive and okay. I'll call you in a few days when things settle down. She was about to send another message when Lucius appeared in the doorway. He didn't look angry. His expression was worse than that. Disappointed. Concerned. Turn it off, he said quietly. Now. Emily's defiance flared. I was just telling my friend I'm okay. She was worried. And now Julian knows exactly where you are. Lucius crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the phone from her hands with gentle but unyielding pressure. He held it up, the screen still glowing with her conversation. Every text, every call, every digital footprint you create can be traced. The Sanguine Order has people everywhere. Telecommunications, tech companies, law enforcement. Emily's stomach dropped. I didn't. I was just. I know. Lucius powered down the phone completely and pocketed it. You wanted connection to your old life. But that life is gone, Emily. The sooner you understand that, the safer you'll be. The words stung because they were true. Emily looked away, blinking back the heat behind her eyes. Lucius's expression softened. Come. You want to understand the world you've entered. I'll show you. 20 minutes later, Emily sat in the passenger seat of a different car. This one a sleek silver sedan that looked expensive but not conspicuous. She'd changed into clothes that had appeared in her room, designer labels she'd never be able to afford. The black dress fit perfectly, and she tried not to think about how Lucius knew her measurements. They drove into the city's elite district, where old money lived behind iron gates and manicured hedges. Lucius pulled up to a mansion blazing with light, luxury cars lining the circular drive. Music and laughter drifted from the open doors. Congressman Bradley's annual fundraiser, Lucius said, cutting the engine. 500 guests, most of them human. At least 100 vampires. Emily stared at the beautiful people in evening wear, champagne glasses catching the light. They look so normal. How can you tell which is which? Watch their eyes. Watch how they move. Lucius gestured to a couple near the entrance. The woman's laugh was too bright, the man's stillness too perfect. The congressman himself is one of us. Has been for 70 years. 3 mayors, a dozen judges, half the city's major real estate developers. He turned to her. This is the shadow world, Emily. We don't hide in crypts and abandoned buildings. We hide in boardrooms and country clubs. We've woven ourselves into the fabric of human civilization so thoroughly that pulling us out would collapse entire power structures. Emily watched a vampire in a tuxedo shake hands with what had to be a human politician, both smiling, both playing their parts. The casual intimacy of it, the integration, was more terrifying than the car chase had been. Julian is part of this, she whispered. Julian wants to rule it, Lucius corrected. And your blood is the key to making himself unstoppable. Emily finally understood the scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about her survival. It was about power, politics, and a hidden war fought in the shadows of the world she thought she knew. What do I do? She asked. Lucius's smile was sharp, dangerous. You learn to play the game better than they do. The training began the next morning in a windowless room deep in the manor's east wing. Emily expected weapons or combat techniques, but instead found only an empty space with stone walls and a single chair positioned in the center. Sit, Lucius instructed, his tone more formal than she'd heard before. Professional, distant. Emily lowered herself into the chair, hyper-aware of how vulnerable the position felt. Lucius circled behind her, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. "Julian will try to glamour you," he said. "It's one of our oldest talents, the ability to cloud minds, manipulate will, make humans see what we want them to see. If you can't resist it, you're already dead." "How do I?" "Look at me." Emily turned in the chair. Lucius stood directly in front of her now, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his ice-pale eyes seemed to hold their own light. When he spoke again, his voice dropped lower, became silk and shadow. "You want to stand up." The compulsion hit like a wave. Emily's muscles tensed, her body beginning to rise without her conscious decision. She fought it, pressing herself back into the chair, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles went white. "Stop," she gasped. Lucius didn't stop. "You trust me completely. You would follow me anywhere." The words wrapped around her mind like velvet chains. Part of her brain screamed that this was manipulation, but another part whispered that it was true, that Lucius had saved her, that she was safe with him, that she should just surrender. "No." Emily's eyes blazed with defiance, even as her body trembled with the effort of resistance. Lucius released the glamour instantly, and Emily sagged forward, gasping. He caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Better. But not good enough. Julian has centuries more experience than I do." Again. They repeated the exercise until Emily's head pounded and sweat dampened her hairline. Each time, Lucius's commands grew more personal, more invasive. He made her believe she was falling, that the room was on fire, that she wanted to tell him her deepest secrets. And each time, Emily fought harder, building walls in her mind brick by stubborn brick. "You're still relying on conscious resistance," Lucius said after the 10th attempt, frustration creeping into his voice. "You need to react instinctively, to make your will impenetrable without thinking about it." "I'm trying," Emily shot back, standing from the chair. "Maybe if you weren't so damn good at this. Julian will be better." Lucius stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. "He'll find every weakness, every crack in your defenses. He'll make you believe you want to die for him. Then maybe I'm just not strong enough." The words burst out before Emily could stop them, carrying all her fear and exhaustion. "Maybe I'm just a human who got unlucky, and this whole half-human, half-vampire thing is just..." Lucius moved with that supernatural speed, suddenly inches from her face. "Look at me, Emily. Believe that you're powerless. Believe that you're nothing." The glamour crashed over her like a tsunami, stronger than anything he'd used before. It pressed against her mind with crushing force, trying to make her small, insignificant, helpless. Emily's vision blurred. Her breath caught, and something inside her snapped. She didn't think, didn't plan. Her hands came up instinctively and connected with Lucius's chest, and light exploded from her palms. Pure, brilliant white light that sent Lucius stumbling backward with an expression of genuine shock. The illumination filled the windowless room like a solar flare, burning away shadow, burning away his glamour, burning with a heat that Emily felt singing in her veins. Then it vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving them both in darkness and stunned silence. Emily stared at her hands, which tingled with residual energy. What was that? Lucius straightened slowly, his eyes wide, the first time she'd seen him truly surprised. A thin wisp of smoke rose from where her hands had touched his chest. His shirt singed. "That," he said quietly, "was your heritage awakening. I didn't mean to." "No, you didn't. That's what makes it remarkable." Lucius crossed back to her, catching her hands before she could pull away. He studied her palms as if reading a text written in her skin. "Half-vampire blood carries light, Emily. It's anathema to full vampires. Even I can't touch that kind of power without consequence." Emily looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't see an ancient king or an impossible protector. She saw someone looking at her with something that resembled awe, respect, maybe more. "You felt it," Lucius said, still holding her hands, his thumbs absently tracing her knuckles. The moment my glamour became a threat, your power responded. That's what you need, that instinct. Emily's heart hammered, but not from fear this time. Lucius stood close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin, could see the way his eyes had shifted from ice to something warmer. The dynamic between them had changed in that flash of light. She wasn't the helpless bride anymore. Wasn't the victim he'd rescued. She was dangerous too. Again, Emily said, not pulling her hands away. Show me again. Lucius's smile was slow, approving, and carried an edge of something that made Emily's breath catch for entirely different reasons. As you wish. The attack came 3 nights later, just as Emily had begun to believe the wards around the manor might actually keep them safe. She was in the library, practicing the mental exercises Lucius had taught her, when every light in the manor died simultaneously. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming, just instant absolute darkness that swallowed everything. Emily's heart lurched. Lucius! He was beside her in seconds, appearing from the shadows like he'd materialized from them. They're here. Stay close to me. Through the tall windows, Emily could see them emerging from the tree line. Dozens of figures in dark clothing, moving with predatory coordination across the manicured grounds. They formed a perimeter around the manor, a tightening noose of supernatural hunters. Then the loudspeaker crackled to life, and Julian's voice rolled across the estate, smooth and mocking. Lucius Valerius, the fallen king, hiding in his crumbling castle. Julian's tone carried false warmth, like a host welcoming guests to a party. I must say, the whole pretend I'm your dad routine at the wedding was inspired. Truly. Did you practice that in the mirror? Emily felt Lucius tense beside her, his jaw tightening. I wonder what dear Emily thinks now that she knows her protective father figure is just an old vampire playing hero. Julian's laugh echoed across the grounds. Did he tell you he's using you too, sweetheart? That your bloodline is valuable to him for the same reasons it's valuable to me? At least I was honest about wanting to marry you. Don't listen, Lucius said quietly, his hand finding Emily's in the darkness. He's trying to divide us. Oh, I'm sure Lucius has been very noble, Julian continued. Very restrained. But let me ask you this, Emily. Has he told you what happens to Dampiers who awaken their full power? How they're hunted by both sides, trusted by neither? You'll never be human again, and you'll never be vampire. You'll be alone. Forever. The words hit harder than Emily wanted to admit, finding the fears she'd been trying to ignore. Enough talk, Lucius called out, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. You want her. Come and take her. The silence that followed was worse than the taunting. Then, as one, the figures began advancing on the manor. Get to the vault in the basement, Lucius commanded, already moving toward the main entrance. There's a passage that leads. The windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the library floor as 3 vampires crashed through, their eyes blazing crimson in the darkness. Lucius moved like liquid death, intercepting the first attacker mid-leap. They collided with force that cracked the wooden floorboards, and Lucius twisted, using the vampire's momentum to send him crashing into the far wall hard enough to crater the plaster. Emily ran for the door, but another vampire blocked her path, a woman with platinum hair and a smile full of fangs. Hello, little lady. We've been so curious about you. Before the vampire could strike, Lucius was there, gripping the woman's shoulder and physically hurling her through the already broken window. Go! Lucius shouted at Emily. Now! Emily fled into the hallway, her heart hammering. Behind her, she heard the sounds of combat, furniture splintering, walls cracking, the inhuman snarls of vampires fighting. More of them were pouring into the manor now. She could hear their footsteps, their voices coordinating the hunt. She made it to the grand staircase before she realized they'd herded her exactly where they wanted. Vampires blocked both the upstairs landing and the path to the basement. 6 of them, forming a cage of predators. From somewhere deeper in the manor, Emily heard Lucius fighting, one against too many, trying to cut through the horde to reach her. But Julian had planned this perfectly, dividing their forces, separating them. A vampire lunged at Emily, and her hands came up instinctively. Light blazed from her palms, and the attacker shrieked, stumbling backward with smoke rising from his face. The others hesitated, wary now. "She's manifesting," one of them hissed. Julian said to take her alive if possible. "If possible," another repeated with a grin. But accidents happen. They began to close in, moving with coordinated precision. Emily backed against the banister, feeling the wood press into her spine. The light had bought her seconds, but she didn't know how to summon it again, didn't know how to control it. A section of the wall exploded outward, and Lucius emerged through the debris. His elegant coat torn, a cut across his cheek already healing. He positioned himself between Emily and the 6 vampires, his eyes glacial with fury. "You want her." Lucius's voice was death itself. "You go through me." The vampires attacked as one, and Lucius met them like a storm, all elegant brutality and centuries of combat experience. He moved too fast for Emily's eyes to track, each strike precise and devastating. But there were too many, and more were coming. Through the chaos, Emily caught a glimpse of the front entrance. Julian stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight, watching the battle with satisfaction. Waiting for his moment. Lucius was winning. Against impossible odds, he was actually winning. Bodies littered the grand foyer, unconscious vampires who'd underestimated the king's strength. Emily watched from the stairs as he moved through Julian's forces like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrible. Then she heard the chanting. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, vampires in dark robes with symbols painted on their skin. Their voices rose in unison, speaking words in a language that made Emily's ears ache. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming viscous, wrong. Lucius spun toward them, recognition and alarm flashing across his face. "No!" The spell completed with a sound like reality tearing. Silver nets materialized from nothing, dropping from above with supernatural speed. They fell over Lucius like liquid metal, wrapping around his body, forcing him to his knees. Where the silver touched his skin, smoke rose. He snarled, straining against the bindings, but even his strength couldn't break through. "Ancient magic," Julian said, stepping over the fallen vampires with casual grace. "Forged specifically to hold creatures like us. Cost me a fortune and 3 blood witches, but you can see it was worth the investment." Lucius's eyes found Emily's across the chaos. "Run," he commanded, his voice strained but still carrying authority. Julian laughed, following Lucius's gaze to where Emily stood frozen on the staircase. Run. Where exactly would she go? He began climbing the stairs, unhurried, savoring the moment. "We're miles from civilization. My people surround this entire estate. And her protector is indisposed." Emily backed up the stairs, her mind racing. The training room was too far. The vault Lucius mentioned was blocked. Every escape route had been cut off. "You know, Emily," Julian continued, still ascending with that predatory patience, "this could have been so much simpler. We could have had a beautiful wedding night. You would have fallen asleep in my arms, and you never would have woken up. Painless, peaceful." His smile was gentle, which made it horrifying. "Now it has to be like this." Emily reached the landing and ran, not toward escape but toward the east wing, toward the training room. Julian followed, not rushing. He knew she was trapped. She burst through the training room door and spun to face him. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them still, remembering Lucius's lessons. "Control your fear. Use it." Julian entered slowly, and Emily saw he was carrying something, an ornate dagger with symbols etched along the blade. The ritual knife. "I don't want to hurt you more than necessary," he said, almost kindly. "If you cooperate, this can be quick." "You've been saying that to women who look like me for 100 years, Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "How did that work out for them?" Julian's expression darkened. They were failures. Diluted blood, weak manifestations. But you. His eyes gleamed with hunger. I saw what you did downstairs. The light. You're the one I've been searching for. He moved forward, and Emily felt the push of his glamour. That crushing mental pressure trying to make her compliant, trying to make her submit. It pressed against her mind like suffocating weight. Believe you're powerless. Believe you're nothing. Well, she'd heard those words before, in training. And she'd learned what came next. Emily let the glamour crash against her mental shields, the walls she'd built through days of grueling practice. It splintered against her will like waves against stone. Julian's eyes widened in surprise. Impossible. You've only trained for days. Emily didn't wait for him to finish. She moved exactly as Lucius had taught her, dropping low and sweeping Julian's legs. He was faster, stronger, but she'd surprised him. He stumbled, and Emily rolled away, putting distance between them. I'm done being hunted, Emily said, rising to her feet. Her hands began to glow with that familiar white light, brighter now, more controlled. I'm done being the sacrifice in your sick ritual. Julian's charming mask finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath. You think a few parlor tricks make you my equal? He rushed her with supernatural speed. But Emily had been training against supernatural speed. She sidestepped at the last possible second, her hands connecting with Julian's shoulder as he passed. Light exploded on contact, and Julian screamed, actually screamed, as it burned through his expensive suit. He spun on her, furious now, all pretense of civility gone. You little. Emily's anger ignited, white-hot and pure. She thought of the photographs, the women who wore her face, the century of murders disguised as marriages. The light in her hands blazed brighter, spreading up her arms like wildfire. No more, she said, and her voice carried power she didn't know she possessed. No more running. No more fear. Julian lunged with the ritual knife, but Emily was ready. She caught his wrist, her light-wreathed hand closing around it like a vice. Julian's scream echoed through the manor as the light burned, forcing him to drop the blade. For the first time in 100 years of hunting, Julian looked afraid. And Emily smiled. The ritual knife lay on the stone floor between them, its etched symbols catching the light that blazed from Emily's hands. Julian saw her gaze flick toward it, understood her intention, and dove for the weapon with desperate speed. Emily was faster. Her hand closed around the ornate hilt, and the moment her light-infused skin touched the blade, the symbols ignited. They glowed with the same brilliant white radiance, as if the weapon had been waiting centuries for someone with her blood to wield it. Julian scrambled backward. His aristocratic composure shattered. You don't know how to use that. The ritual requires specific words, precise incantations. I don't need your ritual, Emily said, advancing on him. The knife felt right in her hand, like it recognized her on some fundamental level. This blade was made to channel half-vampire blood. My blood. Not to drain it, to amplify it. She didn't know how she knew that, but the certainty rang through her bones. This was her heritage speaking, the power that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations. Julian's back hit the wall. For the first time, the hunter had nowhere to run. Emily, wait. We can make a deal. I have resources, connections. Together we could. You killed them, Emily interrupted, her voice cold. All those women. My ancestors. You stole their lives for power you were never meant to have. The light in the blade grew brighter, responding to her anger, her grief, her absolute conviction. Emily raised the knife, and Julian's eyes widened with genuine terror. This is for them, she said, and drove the blade into his chest. The explosion of light was blinding. Julian's scream cut off as the power flooded through him, burning away the centuries of stolen life, the murders, the corruption. His body convulsed once, then crumbled to ash, the supernatural force that had animated him for over a century finally extinguished. When Emily's vision cleared, only his expensive suit remained, empty and smoking on the stone floor. She stood there, shaking, the knife still glowing in her hand. Then Lucius's strained voice reached her from downstairs. "Emily!" She ran, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Lucius was still trapped in the silver nets, but the chanting vampires had fled when their master fell. The remaining members of the Sanguine Order stood frozen in the foyer, staring at Emily with expressions caught between fear and awe. Emily knelt beside Lucius, and the moment her light-touched hands contacted the silver nets, they dissolved like smoke. Lucius surged to his feet, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No." Emily realized she was still holding the ritual knife. "But Julian is gone." A ripple of shock moved through the assembled vampires. Lucius looked at the blade in her hand, at the ash on her skin, and something like pride flickered across his face. One of the vampires, Marcus, the one Julian had punished in the cathedral, slowly dropped to one knee. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying through the ruined foyer. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, every surviving member of the Sanguine Order was kneeling, their heads bowed in submission. Not to Lucius alone, but to both of them. To their king and the queen who had burned down their tyrant. 3 months later, Emily stood in the same manor, but she barely recognized herself. The scared girl in a white wedding dress was gone. In her place stood someone new, dressed in a tailored black suit with crimson accents, her blonde hair swept back in elegant severity, her eyes carrying knowledge that had cost her everything and given her more. Lucius appeared in the doorway, similarly dressed, ready for the council meeting that would reshape vampire politics across the Eastern Territories. He offered his arm with a slight smile. "Ready." Emily took it, feeling the partnership that had evolved between them, no longer protector and victim but equals. Allies who'd been forged in fire and blood. "They're going to challenge us," Emily said as they walked through the manor's halls. "The old families won't accept a half-blood as co-regent." "Let them try," Lucius replied, his voice carrying centuries of authority and newfound respect. "They saw what happened to Julian. They know what you are now. What she was. Not human. Not vampire. Something in between, something rare and powerful. The last of a bloodline that had nearly been extinguished, now awakened and refusing to be prey ever again." As they stepped out into the night, Emily felt the weight of her new role settle around her shoulders like a mantle. The supernatural world had been hiding in shadow for centuries, parasites feeding on the innocent. But now there would be consequences. Now there would be justice. She thought briefly of Jenny, of her cafe job, of the normal life she'd once desperately wanted. That girl had died at the altar. But from those ashes, something stronger had emerged. Emily looked at Lucius, at the ancient king who'd crashed her wedding and shattered her world to save it. "Together?" she asked. His smile was fierce, approving. "Together." They walked into the night side by side, the Vampire King and the Crimson Queen, ready to remake the darkness into something that served the light. And in the shadows, those who preyed on the innocent learned to fear the sound of their names.